Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1120 just came out, and I have to say, with this chapter, Vegapunk just elevated for me to being one of the best side characters that we've ever had in One Piece. Now, I know a lot of people may not feel that same way because many people might be tired of his long speech, although I do feel like the payoff that we were set up to get next chapter will likely make people feel differently, and I do think that once this whole section of the story is read in its entirety, from the build-up to Vegapunk's speech, the start of his speech, to the conclusion of his speech, which is coming up soon, I think people will appreciate much more just the drama and scale and scope and weight of the entire world, all these characters that we've been following for the last 1100 chapters, tuning in to hear the truths about the world. Even if a lot of that information was already known to us readers, getting to see the world find out about it is very interesting, and there are still important revelations that have come up for us that are new to us, the reader, as well. And again, likely next chapter is going to hit us with one of those huge revelations, which is why Oda was saving it for the very end. And before we get any further, I want to congratulate the winners of the chapter 1120 predictions contest. Every Monday at the start of a break week, I have a stream where viewers can compete to see who most accurately predicts the next chapter. And this week's winners were New X7, who predicted that Emmet would say Joy Boy and Luffy would be like, who? Anime Dimension, who predicted that Lilith and or Atlas would sacrifice themselves to save the crew. And finally, Citizen, who predicted that Zoro's group would coup de burst to where Luffy is. So congratulations everybody, and for those of you who want to get your predictions in to compete to get shouted out as the winner of the next break week predictions, just tune in to my Monday stream at the start of every break week. But the reason that I say that Vegapunk is turning into one of the best side characters for me is just the tragedy of his character is really coming to light with this latest chapter. If we go back to when we got that little snippet of him talking to Dragon at Ohara, it seemed like Vegapunk was kind of cold, almost as though he'd become a paid dog for the world government, rather than trying to continue to see through the revolution of the world against the world government. But in this chapter, we get to see something very, very interesting, which is that we see this line of character influences where Clover, he was not the outspoken rebellious scholar that we saw in Ohara from the start. No, Clover actually had a brother who was known to be a D-Tribe member, and it's only in the wake of his brother's death that Clover realized that it was his duty to carry on that legacy and fight to unearth the secrets that the world government had been trying to hide and expose them for all those years, and that was the Clover that we then saw at Ohara. Now, following that, that's the same exact story of Vegapunk. Vegapunk wanted no parts of exposing the world government, digging up forbidden truths or anything like that until Clover died, and then in the wake of that, Vegapunk realized that he had to carry on that will, that legacy himself, and then he began to dedicate his life to continuing that research to dig up the truth and expose the world government, or at least the secrets of the world. I think that's some beautiful storytelling because it just bookends what we got in Ohara. It adds new perspective to the Clover that we saw then, and the steps that got him to where he was at that point in the story, and it connects us to Vegapunk, where the Vegapunk that we meet at Egghead Island is only the way he is because of the experiences that he had coming off of his encounters with Clover before the Ohara incident. And it draws some similarities to me, where if you go back to Clover in Ohara, and Clover is first revealing sort of the brilliance of archaeology and learning history to Robin, he has a very romantic, passionate view of it, and he exudes this sort of joy about the whole thing, much like when Vegapunk in Egghead Island is sort of explaining his dreams to Luffy about infinite energy and the truth of uncovering that. And what's brilliant is that we learned that both Clover and Vegapunk, despite displaying this sort of parallel effusiveness, in reality in their younger years they were not really like this, and it took certain tragic experiences for them to be driven into these lines of passion. So I really do find the story of Vegapunk to be a lot sadder. I feel like if we read the arc again from the beginning to now, we will find Vegapunk's story to be much more interesting and more compelling. Although at the moment, again, I understand people are just a little tired of the speech. However, this brings me to my next point, which is, I call it the Kuma effect. I think it's something new in One Piece that I guess I'll just coin in my head for myself. The Kuma effect is lots of times we might be shown certain tragic moments for a character that we don't fully appreciate because we have yet to learn the backstory of said character. That is how I feel about Kuma, wherein if you go back to earlier sections of Kuma where, we saw Kuma as this automaton sitting in front of Dragon with no brain or anything, and obviously Dragon and the revolutionaries are very upset about this. Or you see Kuma arriving at Marijua, staring up at the red line and then beginning to climb the red line. At that point in time when it happened in the story, I didn't actually feel that much for Kuma. I understood that something sad was happening and it seemed really, really tragic, but I didn't truly feel it inside. However, after getting Kuma's whole backstory and understanding him as a character and the sequence of events that led to these moments of him sitting lifeless lifeless, with no conscience in front of Dragon, just an empty shell, to seeing him just using the last ounces of free will he had left to physically scale the red line with his own hands. Those moments on reread are going to hit a lot harder because now I understand who that character actually is and why I should care about these moments, but I didn't get that at that point in time. I feel like that same thing, that Kuma effect, is going to happen with Emeth, because right now, in this moment, I don't actually feel anything for Emeth, or the sacrifice that he is or isn't about to make, or the shape that he's in, or the memories that he's reliving. To me, it's just stuff that's happening with this character, with this robot. We don't really know the context, the backstory, etc. I feel like once we get the actual backstory of the Void Sentry and Joy Boy and his crew, I feel like when we come back to this section of the story and see Emeth in the wake of all that new information that we have and that new understanding of his character that we have, seeing him in this state will be far more tragic and heartbreaking. It's just that emotional resonance can't possibly be there for us, the reader, just yet. It's one of those retroactive things where we will look back on this as one of the most tragic beats of the story. I mean, it might be like seeing Franky resurrected like 1,000 years from now as a shell of himself, basically being forced to fight against some characters who once defeated Luffy and the Straw Hats centuries ago, and seeing Franky try to hold them off or make some final sacrifice for himself centuries in the future where he's a shell of himself. We would feel a lot then, because that's Franky. That's the guy that we know and we have a lot of context about and we've come to care for. At this moment in time, we just don't have any of that for Emeth, but we will get it once we get that Void Sentry flashback. So I think that's interesting. I think both with Vegapunk's death, I'm gonna on reread find that sadder, and with these Emeth moments, we're gonna find it sadder after we have the context with Joy Boy's section of the story. So even though it may not seem like that exciting at this moment in time, I think that the events of this chapter will work wonders for the story down the line, and especially on reread. And then of course we have the Atlas and Lilith situation. Look, here, I'm not gonna lie, I think I never really felt anything for any of the Vegapunks. York was the only interesting one to me, simply because York was the traitor. Even Lilith, who is the spiciest in terms of personality, in terms of the remaining satellites outside of York, even she I just don't find to be that interesting of a character. I think that's just a consequence of having spent this whole arc with the characters just so spread out, with so much focus being divvied up, and just not really getting that much time to get a feel for each Vegapunk individually. I don't really think I ever came to care for any of them as individuals, and I don't think I ever really came to differentiate that much between their personalities. Again, Lilith is clearly the most interesting of them outside of York, but that's a very low bar. We just haven't spent that much time. So for Atlas's sacrifice, I didn't feel anything really there, because the satellites to me never really felt like real characters, because we were never really made to feel like they're real characters, because we were told from the start that, hey, the Stella, that's the real origin, right? That's the true closest thing we're getting to the original Vegapunk, and all of these other things are pieces of his consciousness that he's kind of split up and taken apart. And I think by killing off the Vegapunk satellites as frequently as he did, I think Oda actually made us feel even less for them, because this is One Piece. Oda in general doesn't kill off characters. If from the very beginning of the arc you're giving us this set of characters that we already feel are kind of quasi-real, in that we know that they're just manifestations of this other original character's consciousness, if we're starting with that view of them, then as you slowly kill them off very casually, well, in the context of this story, where we already know that death is not a casual thing and that Oda really only reserves it for significant moments, the fact that Oda is so willing to just off these characters makes them feel less and less real to us, because it's just like, okay, so these are kind of just the expendable artificial figures that Oda just planted into this arc to try and add some stakes by having them die off very frequently. So basically, because it's One Piece, it's really hard to convince us that you're treating these characters as real characters if you're killing them off frequently, because we know that Oda does not kill off real, meaningful characters that frequently. I think the Vegapunk satellites were always going to fall into that trap. I almost wonder if it would have been better if Oda didn't go with this whole 6 satellite storyline, because it really only came down to Lilith being the one that remains in the end, and I guess it's helpful in that, you know, that way you can play out a little traitor mystery storyline if you've got 6 of them, but I don't think anybody found that traitor mystery storyline that engaging to begin with. So at the end of the day, I do feel like a lot of these Vegapunks basically serve to just fill up a lot of space, a lot of dialogue, and didn't really add much to the story, and certainly did not add any sense of stakes, because as soon as you're killing them off easily, you're not actually adding to the stakes, you're actually lessening them by making it clear that it doesn't matter if these characters die. So that's my overall feeling on that, but I do feel like Lilith getting to accompany the crew is an interesting twist, because this is the first time we've had a true scientist sailing with the crew, Caesar Clown notwithstanding, because he was non-cooperative. So whether or not that means Lilith is going to be a Straw Hat, and now we officially have Vegapunk as a Straw Hat in a way, that remains to be seen. I assume that Lilith doesn't have all of Vegapunk intelligence, so it'll be a sort of nerfed version of Vegapunk, which might be good to see the crew work with, as long as it doesn't impede on, Frankie's role in the crew or anything like that. But I do think at the very least Vegapunk sailing with them for a little bit is an interesting development. We kind of just got to wait and see whether or not that turns into Straw Hat material. And finally, we have the voice of the people, the comments from my top tier of patrons. So Justin Holland asks, how long do you think this Luffy doesn't know he's Joy Boy / Nika thing will go on for? That's actually a great question, because I feel like it doesn't add that much to the story. Luffy having knowledge or not having knowledge rarely ever matters to the story. He could not know anything about the Will of D, and I don't think it would really affect how much his actions play out over the course of what he does. He's usually driven by emotion and how much he cares about people. So as long as he's got those two things checked off, the full lore knowledge, it's just almost never going to be that relevant to him. I have yet to see Luffy even care that much that the fruit that he thought he had for so long turned out to be totally different than what he believed. He just kind of rolls with it. So to me, it's one of those things where I kind of hope it's either addressed soon or not addressed soon. I just hope it's not a recurring thing where like Joy Boy's being brought up and Luffy's kind of like, what's that? What's up with this? And then never really delving into it just because that's the type of character he is, because either he should care about it or not care about it, and I think that thing should just be checked off for us really, really soon. I don't know when it's going to be determined, whether this is a care about it sort of thing for Luffy and it affects his whole sense of self and destiny and purpose, or a not care about it type of thing, in which case I hope it's not brought up that frequently, because if it's never actually going to matter for him and he's never actually going to process that internally as a character, then who really cares whether or not he knows he's Joy Boy or not? So that's my views on that, and I'm really looking forward to next chapter and the big bombshell that Vegapunk's going to drop, and I will talk to you all later.